Hello everyone, this is Mr. U.S. History, and this is President James K. Polk, our 11th president and one of our least known consequential presidents. Polk had been one of the main reasons why our country has so much land. In fact, this whole territory, Texas, the Mexican secession, and the Oregon Territory, all of that territory came under James K. Polk. Polk had also established an independent treasury, which Van Buren was not able to do, and this was ultimately a better alternative in his mind than the national bank. Polk had also lowered tariff rates substantially, not to mention the fact that he had two main objectives, which were to gain California and Texas. No, it was to gain California and much of the Southwest from Mexico, in addition to getting Oregon from the British. Polk had been successful in threatening the British with war and thus bluffing them into giving him all of Oregon territory. Polk also successfully annexed Texas. It was under Polk that Texas got annexed by the United States, and this was the whole territory of Texas, which was previously an independent country. We also got much of the American Southwest, which was as a result of a war with Mexico that Polk had started. So he started this by sending General Zachary Taylor, who is right over here, to disputed territories, and then Mexican troops fired on American troops, thus starting the war with Mexico. And in this war, Polk had often come into conflict with General Winfield Scott and General Zachary Taylor, often because of political reasons, largely because Polk had preferred a Democrat to take care of the war effort, because Scott and Taylor were both Whigs. The United States ultimately won the war, though, and thanks to Polk, and Polk actually retired after one term and got all of this done in just 4 years, and ultimately he retired before he could deal with the issue of whether or not slavery would be permitted in this territory and the growing controversy regarding it. And ultimately, after Polk left office, he had died of cholera just 3 months later, which ultimately I think was a cause of him drinking contaminated water, which also killed his successor, Zachary Taylor. And let me just say that Polk was a much better leader than those who followed him, as well as the fact that had Polk served a second term as president, it is likely that he may have done a much better job in handling the slavery issue. James Polk ultimately was a consequential figure, and if we remove him from history, what would have changed? Well, this is assuming that he lost the 1844 presidential election to Henry Clay, and there are many ways that could have happened. One way is that President John Tyler did not drop out of the race as a third-party candidate, and thus succeeded in splitting the vote between him and Polk, and ultimately, the split vote in Virginia among Democrats is what ultimately caused Henry Clay to win the state. Or another possibility is that Henry Clay did not suffer from the slavery issue, as an abolitionist third party led by James Burney had taken away many anti-slavery Whigs from Henry Clay. Under a Clay presidency, it's very likely. So another possibility would be that Polk did not moderate his stance on tariffs, which would cost him the state of Pennsylvania, a very pro-tariff state. New York also could have easily gone to Clay had he been able to successfully appease many immigrant votes rather than siding with the nativists. The Mexican-American War would and under a Clay presidency, it is very unlikely that we would get into war with Mexico, because Clay himself was opposed to the war with Mexico. He also was against annexing Texas, fearing it would cause a sectional crisis and it would cause the reopening of the slavery issue, and thus he would not have favored the Mexican-American War. Even several Southerners, such as Alexander Stephens, the future Confederate vice president, and John C. Calhoun, opposed the Mexican-American War, though they did so on the stance that they feared that the North would prohibit slavery in these new territories. Mexico and Texas would most likely be fighting in wars around this period if the United States did not annex Texas. Clay would also have not been nearly as aggressive as Polk in getting Oregon Territory. He most likely would have either stuck with the joint occupation, or they would have taken the Columbia River and they would have split over there, with the British taking the northern part, the western part of the Columbia River, and the United States taking the eastern part, so they would both have access to it. Clay also would not have lowered tariffs. Clay was a big supporter of tariffs, and the Walker tariff, no, not yet, and the tariff which had reduced the tariff rates imposed by the Walker tariff would not have happened. Clay would have wanted to reestablish a national bank, but with a Democratic Congress, I doubt that he would be able to do so. Unlike Polk, Polk did not support the filibuster in Cuba and was against annexing Cuba, and I'm pretty sure Henry Clay would do the same out of fear of stirring a sectional crisis. And the United States' influence in Latin America was mainly caused by by the lowering of tariff rates. And had Henry Clay not lowered these tariff rates, the influence we had in Latin America would most likely not have happened. Clay would have probably established the Department of the Interior and would have probably done it a lot easier than Polk did. So around the 1848 election, I would probably assume that Henry Clay would not run for re-election, mostly because of health issues and his view that the president should be a subordinate to Congress, though I don't know if he would follow through with this view as president himself. So the Democratic candidate for president in 1848 would be Lewis Cass, while the Whigs would be split between the Cotton Whigs, who were led by Daniel Webster, and the Conscious Whigs, who were led by Charles Sumner. In this case, without the Mexican-American War, I doubt that Zachary Taylor would be a major contender and would most likely not be nominated. Most likely it would be Winfield Scott, a veteran of the War of 1812, and someone who had fought numerous Native American wars, but he had mostly come into the spotlight because of the Mexican-American War, but I still think he would have gotten nominated, as the Whigs would want another war hero. And more likely than not, the Free Soil Party would not have emerged, because the Free Soil Party was created to prevent the spread of slavery into these new territories. And since we've already acquired these new territories, and since these territories have never even been acquired in the first place, I doubt that the slavery issue would even become a major thing. The Democratic candidate, Lewis Cass, would most likely win the presidential election, because Lewis Cass mainly lost because of the vote splitting between him and the anti-slavery Democrats. And there may even also be also around this time, the California Gold Rush occurs, and many settlers move into California in droves, most likely, even though California would still be a part of Mexico, and we may even see an independence movement from Mexico in California, which would maybe even form its own country, and who knows, maybe Texas and California can join together to form their own country. And keep in mind, at this time, Texas and California did not have the same hate for each other that they do now. The American Southwest would still be added probably, but a lot later. And I'm saying this because Mexico was very bankrupt and out of money, and it was just failing. So it would most likely so the United States may even make a purchase similar to the Louisiana Purchase that Jefferson did. And the French, however, this would take a very long time, because the French would have gone to war with Mexico themselves, as they had tried to invade Mexico. And around this period in time, the French Emperor Napoleon III, he himself face pressure from the United States to withdraw forces from Mexico, and I'm pretty sure a similar thing would happen. But anyway, the Civil War would most likely be delayed by around a decade or two if Polk was not president, but it still would have happened, and really not much changes in this scenario, despite how consequential Polk was. So, anyway, thank you all for watching this video. Make sure you like this video and subscribe.